everyone, welcome to another episode of You've Got Potential. Today we are here with Melissa, biomedical engineering student. Melissa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello. My name is Melissa. I'm a biomedical engineering student at Rutgers. I'm also doing a minor in business administration. And very recently, literally Friday afternoon, I got accepted to the master's program at Rutgers for biomedical engineering. So I'll be like,
God.
I know. So I'll be like half an undergrad, half a master's student.
Oh my God, congratulations. I didn't know.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Congratulations.
So what made you choose business administration as a minor?
So that's an excellent question. So I've always been like interested in business to some aspect, but I didn't really know to what extent. Initially when I had applied to Rutgers, when you apply, you have like 3 different schools you can apply to. So I did School of Engineering, School of Business, and then Arts and Sciences. And then I got accepted into all 3 of them, but I figured since engineering is like a little bit more difficult than some of the other majors, I figured if I ever wanted to switch out of engineering, it would be easier. So then I chose engineering, but I still kind of had like that interest in business. And then sophomore year, so like the second semester of sophomore year, that's actually when like COVID hit. So we were like basically kicked out of Rutgers and like we had to take classes online and everything. But within that transition during the summer, I was like, I'm kind of like still interested in business. And then since I figured everything was going to continue being online, I was like, I think I still have like a chance and more time to take more classes. So I was like, oh, let me at least do a business minor. And I'm actually really happy I did because it gave me like a different perspective to industry. And now that I'm working in research, I like kind of put industry in the back burner. But as an engineer, like I've always wanted to like just thinking of just like one job working in industry. So I was like, I like to have the technical knowledge as an engineer, but also like understanding in terms of like marketing and like supply chain and like some understanding of logistics. I feel like that would be useful in an industry context.
And do you want to maybe talk about what sort of research you do?
Oh, yes. So I currently work in the Abrera lab with Monica. And we also get to see Georgiana every now and then. So within that lab, I'm actually an NIH Diversity Fellow. That is my position. So I'm going to be working there for 2 years. And the plan is that I was working or am working full-time during the summer, part-time during my senior year, like fall and spring semester, and then full-time for a gap year. And what I do is I work with this program called Deep Lab Cut, which incorporates like deep learning and like computer vision. And the overall project is like kind of complicated to explain because I started like 2 months ago. But the context is that I work with a postdoc and a grad student. And so the grad student works with behavior. She's I don't want to say her position because I'm not exactly sure, but she's definitely involved in neuroscience. And so is the postdoc that I work with. He's also positioned, I guess, would be a neuroscientist. And so she works with these mice and she has them on a treadmill, which was created by a company called DigiGate. And within this treadmill, you can change the velocity of it. So the videos we're recording are from 10 to 40 centimeters per second. So that's called the treadmill experiment or like the DigiGate experiment. And then we have a natural walk experiment where they're just like walking on a walkway. It's not that big. It's like less than 2 feet, I would say. And so we take videos of these mice walking either on the natural walk or on the treadmill. And before they're walking, the graduate student, she actually shaved the mice and like put labels on the mouse. And I always compare it to like my arm because it's very comparable. So we're working with the hind limbs. So we label the iliac crest and the hip, and then the knee, the ankle, the MTP, which stands for metatarsal, I want to say phalange, but I'm not sure. And then the toe. So we have 6 points that we're working with. And so she takes these videos, she gives them to me. I input it in the program called Deep Lab Cut. And if we were to say that the video has 1,000 frames, I would manually label 300 of those frames. And within the program, based off the next step from labeling them would be training the network. And then within that stage, it's based off the amount of iterations that you put into the network to do. And with each iteration, the program is learning where these points are. And it's looking at the different contrasts between the points that you actually label and like the background. And within each iteration, it also tells you like the learning rate that the program is learning, and it also has a loss function to see how good the program is working. And after this stage, which is the training the network, you do evaluating the network. And then following that, you do analyze video. And within that process, at the end of it, you get an Excel sheet, which gives you the X and Y coordinates of the points that you were labeled throughout the whole video. So it was working with 1,000 frames. I labeled 300 frames. And then after the program finishes doing all of the work, it labels the remaining 700 frames. And within these X and Y coordinates, there's also a corresponding likelihood value. So the really good ones are like 0.99, which is like what I'm getting now, which is super exciting. Because in the beginning, oh, thank you guys. Because in the beginning, I did my first like project, which is also, so you create a project, but the objective is to create a neural network, which is having like multiple videos inputted in one project. And I'm kind of going a little bit back and forth, but within the neural network, that's because you have a lot of videos included, and it would be really good at the training stage, which means you would get really good data for the analyzed video, and that's at the stage where you get the likelihood values. So from that, you work and you do kinematic analysis, and you can calculate different angles of, like, you would calculate, say, for the hip, which would be in between the iliac crest and the knee. So that's the stage that I'm currently working at. We're getting like good numbers with these X and Y coordinates, but now it's like putting them into use and like creating graphs. And we're also working with like calculating velocity and acceleration and comparing. And then in terms of like, so that's my perspective with the program that I'm working with. But then we're taking it back to like the actual science of it, in terms of like the neuroscience, you're working with the control group and the experimental group. And in this case, we're looking at these neurons called, they're in the deep dorsal horn, and they're called parvallium. So it's like deep dorsal horn parvallium neurons. And so some of the mice have them turned on and some of them have them turned off. I would not be able to elaborate how you turn them off, but that's part of the neuroscience, which I am not related to. And so we just want to analyze, we're not at the graph stage yet because I haven't created those yet, but it would be to create the graphs and then see if there's any differences between like the angles or their like stride length or their step frequency or their velocity if they have these neurons or if they don't.
What about those neurons makes them special?
The overall project is focused on like motor behaviors, so seeing how they're walking. So I do have some very minimal background knowledge that these neurons are involved in locomotion. So the objective is to see like if they were to walk differently versus having them versus not having them. That's the extent of the knowledge that I know, unfortunately, in that context.
I actually want to bring up coding because, like you say, you don't do a lot of coding, but it looks like you do a lot of coding from when I'm watching you work, which like my brain can't comprehend in the slightest. But yeah, so the whatever coding knowledge that you have, is that something you learned in the School of Engineering, or is that something you picked up on your own? Like, how did that come about?
So that's a super awesome question. So I have no coding background before I went into Rutgers, like literally nothing whatsoever in high school. I came into Rutgers freshman year. All freshmen in engineering have to take Intro to Computers, which is our first introductory course to take MATLAB. And that's like the coding program that all engineers, specifically at Rutgers, use. If you speak to like actual like computer scientists or like electrical engineers or like software engineers, they're like, we hate MATLAB, it's so stupid, like go Python, go Java, go literally everything else except MATLAB. But if you talk to engineers, like MATLAB gets the job done, we don't really care. The only unfortunate thing is that once you are like a legit coder and you have to learn all the programs, some of them, like them as in Python and Java, they're a little bit more similar to each other in terms of syntax, versus with MATLAB, it's like completely upside down, flipped inside out, and that's why everybody hates it, but it gets the job done. And then the second course I took was Numerical Modeling, which was really cool. It was just like using MATLAB in biomedical context. So I had a project one time where we were working with Poiseuille's, I always pronounce his name wrong, but we were working with Poiseuille's law, which has to do with like fluid flow and or like pressure also. So we were working with, I also, my knowledge in like physiology is like really terrible, but we were working something in the context of blood flow. So I don't know if it goes through veins or arteries or one of those, but we had an example where it was flowing. I'm going to use these terms, veins or arteries, interchangeably, but we had blood flow flowing at one rate, and then we had another example where a patient had a blood clot, so it's flowing at a different rate. So then we like came up with like a different, like some type of code, and like we actually like graphed the difference between like a patient who has like normal blood flow versus having a blood clot. So it's basically like using MATLAB in like specific biomedical situations.
So I'm very interested. We started this conversation talking about your interest in both business and industry research. How do you think that working on this kind of project has influenced maybe your wishes to go into industry, or maybe contributed to your like making you see, oh yes, industry is like where I see myself in the future? Like, I don't know, it's a research lab in university, so I'm thinking, oh, maybe one could be interested in going academia after, like, I don't know, doing something like that. But like, has it changed at all how you view industry, for the better or for the worse, or for like the super better? I don't know. Like, I'm very interested, or like the business aspect of things too.
Oh, yes. So that's an awesome question. Thank you so much for asking. So I'm not sure if it really has changed so much of my industry perspective, just because I feel like with this is more in some of the shift the conversation in terms of it's definitely encouraged me more into academia. So I'm actually like really interested maybe in like, hopefully yes, in pursuing my PhD. And then from there, I'm considering now like doing like the postdoc route and like becoming a PI or like at least like a research professor, because that's like something that I didn't even know was an option. And I don't know why I didn't know it was an option, but I think it was because I didn't even know what the path was. Like obviously I go to Rutgers, I have professors and they work in research, but like I didn't know that I could do that too. So it was really cool having meetings with the PI, which is Victoria or Dr. Ibarra. And she like exposed me to that other career option that I didn't even know was made available to me. I was like, wow, I really like that now. And now like going into work every day and just like working in that environment of like kind of like struggling and having error messages come out of nowhere, but then like, oh, it gets better. And the error turns into like complete, or it's like next step, or like it literally says like continue on to next step. Like, yeah. So that's definitely super exciting. And then going back in terms of industry, to some context, I do want to at some point either do like an internship or like actually work in an industry context, just because I definitely want to expose myself at some point before I just like straight continue into academia with like a PhD and everything. Like I want to like, at least say I have exposed myself.
I was also wondering, like way back in the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that you were working under the NIH under some sort of scholarship. I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that, what got you interested in it, how you found it, all that good stuff.
Oh, yes. So I started working in the Abrera Lab June of 2020. And the way I got into the Abrera Lab was because I am a member of LSAMP at Rutgers, which I believe stands for Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation. And it's this really awesome program at Rutgers, which helps like minority students get involved in like research opportunities, and it gives them like really good foundation for like professional development. And they gave us like this application portal where we can apply to like different research opportunities for the summer. And I saw like Dr. Abrera's application in terms of working with three-dimensional reconstruction. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. So I applied, I got accepted, super excited. So what I did from June of 2020 till April of 2021, so like a full year, was that I was given these images of oxytocin receptor expressing neurons that were found in the spinal cord. And they were given to me in 2D, like straight off like a microscope image. And then I put them in a program called Neuromantic, and you would trace the neuron and it would create it from a 2D image into a 3D image, which is super cool. And it was like, you can like turn it around with your mouse and it had like dimension to it. So that was a really good experience. So I had started in June and it was supposed to end in August because that's the summer period. But I was also working with another student and they were like, oh, like you guys are doing so good. Do you guys want to continue working with the lab? We're like, yeah, sure. So we continued working, and then in December, I had a meeting with the PI, Dr. Abrera, and she was like, "Oh, like I've heard like such good things about you from your mentors, like working on the program." I was like, "Cool, thanks." And she was also working with the grad student and the postdoc on this project, which is what I mentioned before, working with the locomotion project. It's called the PV project. But that was like specific to the neuron. So she had mentioned, she asked me, she's like, "Oh, like what are your plans for the summer?" Which would be like this summer of 2021. And I was like, "Oh, like I'm applying to like some internships, like maybe some different," I didn't want to tell her different research opportunities because I was like, "Man, I'm currently working in your lab." And I was like, "I'm having a great time." And I was like, "Maybe I will expose myself to something else." And I was like, "Man, like I don't think I should tell her that. I don't know if that's rude or not." So she was like, "Oh, so we had this new position for an NIH diversity supplement, which would be working adjacent to that, like within that project, but also having like my own specific objective within that project." So she was like, "Oh, like, would you be interested?" And I was like, "I don't really know what that means, but I know what the NIH is, and that sounds really cool." So I was like, "Yeah, sure." So she was like, "Okay, awesome." And then she was like, "So from here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have like bi-weekly meetings, and we'll create like the grant proposal together, and we'll like create the bio sketches, and we'll work from there." And she was like, "Oh, and if you could also think of a biomedical engineering professor that you would want to have as your mentor to incorporate within the project, that would be great." And I was like, "Okay." So then from there, she as in the PI, she had all of the like the grant proposal, like all of the information, because it was the same as the previous grant that they had. So I believe it was like an RO1. Don't know what that means, but that's what it's called. So that like project was like already created, established, and they were currently working on it for a few years, but they had like, I guess, extra funding to have a diversity fellow. So she had asked me, she was like, "Oh, like, by the way, like, what nationality are you?" I was like, "Oh, I love talking about it. I'm half Dominican, half Puerto Rican." She's like, "Oh, that's great." I was like, "Yeah, I know." So then from there, like I created my own bio sketch, and at the time I was like, "What is this?" But it was basically like writing a personal statement about myself, and then writing about my short-term goals and my long-term goals, and then also including my transcript. And then I had actually contacted that professor that I mentioned before, that was in my intro to biomedical engineering course, who had talked about, introduced me to optics and imaging. So he is actually my mentor for this project. And we also have some other mentors. So the postdoc that I had mentioned also, his name is Mark. He is my official mentor on the project. And obviously the PI is my mentor. And I have like 2 or 3 other mentors within the project. And yeah, so we had started the application process in December. We submitted it We submitted it February 15th, and then we got accepted April 15th. And then I started working in the lab. My start date was technically May 17th, but that was a Friday. So who wants to start working on Friday? So we just like pushed it to Monday. And then since May 20th, which is like a Monday, I've been working in the lab, and that's the process of how I got here.
That's amazing. Congratulations again. I want to kind of focus on the point you said, like, oh, you like talking about your nationality and everything, and it was a diversity fellowship. So you also mentioned this in the interview application form, but like, what is it like to be a Hispanic woman in engineering? Because we've had this conversation many a time in the lab before, but like not only like ethnic diversity, but also, or ethnic minority, but also like gender minority, because I don't know, we've talked about this, but basically like in science, it goes like the further you are away from like biology, like going closer and closer to mathematics and physics or whatever, the less female representation you see. So like, what is it like to break that stereotype? Because, you know, good for you and everything. But yeah, what is it like?
So that's really awesome. And I always get this question, but I feel like I'm kind of an outlier in this question just because it's like super intense. Because in high school, I went to an all-girls Catholic high school. So like all like straight out of 8th grade, all 4 years, I've only seen women. And so when I went to college, like aside from doing engineering, I was like, wow, there's men everywhere. So I was just like, obviously, like I knew what was going on, but it was just like very different because like it was completely different from high school. And then just going into like engineering, which yes, it is typically a male dominated field. It was like specifically dominated from my perspective. But aside that 4 years of high school experience, it's definitely something that you notice, obviously, when there's more like or males in your classroom. I remember from my like Calc 1 course, it was like a lecture hall, and like you're not really like when you're a freshman, like first 2 weeks of school, you don't really care about other people. You're just like, oh my God, like what's going on with me? So I really didn't notice the gender like discrepancy. And then when I went to my recitation, which was only like 20 people, that's all, maybe like 25, 24 people, I came in the classroom and there was like 14 other guys and it was just me. And I got there maybe like 10 minutes early. I was like, am I in the wrong class? And then once like class had started, there was only like 3 more girls that showed up. So I was like, oh, this is what everybody talks about. Oh, this is why they say there's more men. I was like, oh, wow. So except in that context, like it's definitely something that you notice just by looking around. You're like, oh wow, there's not a lot of girls in this recitation. But from my experience, it's nothing like severe. Like I've never like been discriminated against because of my gender. So that's definitely something exciting. So in terms of nationality, I definitely noticed that there's like not a lot of people that look like me. But that's like totally okay, especially because at Rutgers it's like so diverse. But specifically, there's the Society of Hispanic Engineers, which stands for SHE, and there's just like all these Hispanics all working together in engineering, and it's like super inclusive. So even if you're not Hispanic, you can join the society. Which is, there's also a lot of people who aren't Hispanic in the society, and it's just nice to like every now and then. Yes, like it's great to work with like everyone, but sometimes every now and then you do want to like step back and you're like, I want to listen to music that like I listen to at home. So it's kind of like that comfort of like, I like these people look like me. We eat the same food. We listen to the same music. Like, oh, this is kind of cool.
Going forward, what is one thing you look forward to the most? Like you mentioned that you got into the master's program, but you also mentioned that the NIH fellowship will require an extra year from you after graduating. So how are you going to navigate that?
That's an excellent question. So I actually just got accepted into the program on Friday. So I actually have to set up a meeting with Dr. Brea in terms of like the logistics of how that works out. Because so the NIH Diversity Fellowship is specifically like working for 2 years, and then that last year would be a full gap year. So it's intended for me to be working full time, but if I'm a student, I cannot be working full time. So I'm not sure what the arrangements would be in terms of adjusting around that schedule, but something that's very convenient about the master's program. As I mentioned before, I do start taking some of my classes senior year, which is like awesome. And so ideally it's called the Combined Master's Program at Rutgers. So it's intended to finish undergrad in 4 years and your master's in 5 years. But it's not restricted to 5 years, including undergrad. So like you can take you can complete everything in 6 years if needed, or like an extra summer. So that's definitely like that convenience is definitely something I'm looking forward to, where if I do end up having to work more because of that fellowship that I got first, I'm able to extend the time that I'm participating in the master's program. So that's definitely something I'm looking forward to.
I wanted to ask, like, in terms of advice you have for incoming biomedical engineers or engineers in general, or maybe even to like other Hispanic women looking to be into STEM, to go into STEM, what are like some pointers or how to navigate Rutgers and as that kind of incoming student?
Awesome question. My always go-to advice is ask questions. That is like the one thing that I do all the time. And whenever I feel like I've reached my threshold, whoever I'm asking, I'm like, by the way, like, am I asking you too many questions? Like, am I being too annoying? And they're like, no, it's fine. And I'm like, okay, cool, because I have so many more. So definitely asking questions. Literally ask anyone and everyone questions. That's always my go-to advice. And whenever you're working on a project or whatever you're working on, if you ever do have a question and you want someone to help you, I found that trying to help yourself first, so trying to troubleshoot and navigate any and every possible way first, and then emailing or asking someone like, hey, I have this issue. I've tried solutions A, B, and C. None of them work. When I tried A, B, and C, this happened, that happened, and that happened. What can I do from here? Oh, something else is don't be discouraged if your GPA is not what you want it to be. I know when I applied to the Abreu Lab, I didn't have the GPA that was the requirement, but and then that's something also really encouraging within the LSAMP program. They had mentioned, like, they put like a little asterisk in their email when they were like, oh, like these are all of the research opportunities you can apply to, like up to 3. And they were like, oh, like do not be discouraged if you don't meet the GPA requirements. Like maybe you'll impress them with your essay or the interview. And I think I did. But yeah, at the time I applied and I was like, man, like that's not, like it wasn't terribly off. And I was like, that's not my GPA. But I still applied anyways because I had read the description and I was like, oh, this is so cool. And then long term, I saw that the Abreu Lab was embedded in like the Keck Center. And that also had relations to working in imaging. And I was like, oh man, that's what I want to do. Like, technically, I don't meet the requirements, but I'm still going to apply. And I got in. But yeah, that's definitely something I would like keep in mind, is that even if you don't meet the minimum requirements, but like you're kind of close, I wouldn't let that discourage you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to have this interview. I know I kind of bombarded you to do this in the lab, and
I wanted to do it.
Yeah. But I've been also like just randomly asking people everywhere if they want to, like, hey, fill out this Google form. But no, thank you again for your enthusiasm in our little project, and for explaining yours so well. And I wish you the best of luck for your master's program. I am so excited for that and all the other amazing things you are sure to accomplish. And just to close as our like signature exit, we want to remind you and all of our listeners that you've got potential.